The observer is the observed. What does it really mean? A Buddhist wisdom. The big misunderstanding. Where does the I come from? Right now, as you listen to these words, something within you is listening too. It may feel like a quiet presence behind your eyes. A voice that reflects, reacts, and constantly narrates. It says, I understand, or I don't like this, or simply, this is me. It comments when you look in the mirror. It celebrates when things go well and blames when they don't. It speaks as though it were the center of everything. We often call this inner voice the self, the observer, or simply I. And this sense of I feels so normal, so convincing, that we rarely question it. It feels like there is a solid me inside, living in this body, looking out at a separate world. This split between the one who sees and the thing being seen seems obvious, even necessary. I am here, we believe, and the world is out there. But this simple division, so subtle and familiar, is the silent root of much of our suffering. It is from this sense of separateness that loneliness grows. Because if I am here and you are over there, connection becomes fragile. From it comes fear, because this little I seems small in the face of an unpredictable world. From it comes conflict, because the world doesn't always give me what I want, and others seem to stand in the way. According to ancient Buddhist wisdom, the core of the problem is not the world itself, but the lens through which we view it. The Buddha called this lens avijja, not seeing clearly. It is not that we are ignorant in the ordinary sense. Rather, we are seeing through a story, the story of me, and mistaking it for reality. From this blurry vision arise two powerful forces: tanha, the craving for what pleases this self, and upadana, the clinging to the very idea that this self exists as a fixed identity. In a world that constantly changes, we cling to something that feels unchanging, the I. This clinging draws a boundary: my thoughts, my feelings, my body, my life. The more we grasp at this identity, the more real it seems. But what if that boundary is an illusion? What if this strong sense of separation between me and the world is not a fact, but a misperception? What if the observer and the observed were never truly two? This brings us to the first vital question of our journey. If this I feels so real, but is perhaps only a story, then what is it made of? What are its parts? Is it something solid or something flowing? To begin to answer this, we must look gently, honestly, and with curiosity. We must examine the nature of the one who claims to be looking. This is the beginning of our path, not toward new beliefs, but toward clear seeing. A seeing that may show us not just what the I is made of, but how it arises, how it relates to the world, and how, through this insight, we may find a new kind of freedom, one that is not built on separation, but on a deep, lived understanding of connection. Looking inside the I, the idea of no self. To understand the nature of the I, we must begin not by looking outward, but by turning inward into the stream of our own lived experience. This is not a search for answers in books or theories, but a direct and honest inquiry into what is truly happening right now. The Buddha's radical insight into this inquiry is called anatta, no self. This does not mean that you are a ghost or a lie. You are here, seeing, thinking, feeling. But look more closely. Is there anything in your experience that remains unchanged? Is there a core, a controller, a permanent me behind the eyes? The Buddha said no. What we call I is not one thing, but a flow, a combination of 5 ever-changing processes called the 5 aggregates, Pancakandha. These are not things we possess. They are what we are, moment to moment. But none of them, on their own or combined, are a self. Let's take a simple moment, looking at a tree, and observe what's really happening. First, there is form, rupa, the body and senses. Light from the tree enters the eye, the brain, the nervous system. They process the signal. This is biology, chemistry, physics. But none of it is fixed. The body is aging, shifting, full of conditions. It is alive, but it is not a self. Second, there is feeling, Vedana, the basic tone of experience. Seeing the tree may feel peaceful, or boring, or sharp and fresh. This pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling arises and fades quickly. It flavors the moment, but never holds still. Could something this fleeting be who we are? Third, there is perception, sanya, the mind's recognition. Tree, green, tall. These labels help us navigate the world, but they are not reality itself. They are shortcuts, shaped by memory and habit. Perception identifies patterns. It doesn't see truth. Fourth, there are mental formations, sankhara, our reactions, thoughts, intentions. I love trees. This reminds me of my childhood. I want to rest here. These mental movements are deeply personal, yet always changing. They rise like waves and vanish just as quickly. Can anything this unstable be the foundation of a self? And finally, the 5th aggregate, consciousness, vijnana. This is the most subtle and often misunderstood. It is not a thing watching from behind the scenes. It is the continuous stream of knowing, seeing, hearing, sensing, thinking. It changes depending on conditions. Visual consciousness when seeing, auditory when hearing, and so on. It is not a single unified witness, but many flashes of awareness arising and ceasing depending on what's happening. Importantly, consciousness is not the self. It is not the hidden I we've been searching for. It is a process, just like the others. A moment-to-moment unfolding, dependent on contact with the world. There is no consciousness without something to be conscious of. No seer without the seen. So, where is the I? We have looked through the body, feelings, perception, thought, and even consciousness. But nowhere do we find a permanent, separate entity. Instead, we find a dance of conditions, arising together like sparks from a flame. The self is not a solid stone. It is a river. Not a thing, but a happening. To see this clearly is not to become cold or detached. It is to wake up from a story we've been telling. The story of me as something fixed, separate, in control. When this story softens, what's left is life. Fluid, alive, interconnected. And if the observer and the observed are both processes, intertwined, impermanent, then what is the real relationship between them? Are they two, or just one movement seen from different sides? To answer that, we must go further still, into the law that binds all things together. That is the journey ahead. The dance of reality, how everything is connected. If we look closely at life, we do not find solid things, we find movement. The I we assume to be fixed reveals itself as a stream of processes. And the world we thought was separate is also flowing, shifting, dependent. This brings us to a deeper question. If both the observer and the observed are impermanent processes, what is the real relationship between them? The Buddha gave us a profound key to this mystery. It is called paticcasamuppada, dependent origination. Though the word may sound complex, its meaning is disarmingly simple. This exists because that exists. This arises because that arises. Nothing stands alone. Everything leans. Everything rests on something else. A flower is not just a flower. It is sunlight, soil, rain, and time. And those conditions are not independent either. They too arise from other causes. The entire universe is a web of relationships, with not a single strand holding itself up. Let's bring this truth down to something as simple as the act of seeing. Imagine you are standing quietly, looking at a tree. You might say, "There is me, and there is the tree I see." It feels like a basic fact. But Buddhist teachings ask us to look more carefully. What really happens when seeing occurs? For the experience of seeing to arise, several conditions must come together. There must be an I, a visible form, like a tree, and consciousness. If any one of these is missing, there is no seeing. The I alone does not see. The tree alone does not cause vision. And awareness without contact remains silent. Only when the I meets the tree and awareness is present does the experience of seeing come alive. It's not that first there is an I, then a tree, and then the seeing happens. They arise together, dependently, like a flame that appears only when fuel, oxygen, and heat are all present. The flame is not in any one element. It exists only in their union. In the same way, experience is not the property of a self. It is the co-arising of many causes. So where is the separation? There is no fixed seer behind the I, no independent thing being seen. The one who sees and the thing that is seen are not two separate entities. They are two sides of the same event. Just as you cannot separate the dancer from the dance, you cannot pull apart the observer from the observed. This is what it means when we say, the observer is the observed. Not as a metaphor, but as a fact of experience. It's not that two things become one, it's that they were never two to begin with. The duality was imagined, like a line drawn on water. Language carves the world into subject and object, self and other. But reality does not follow the logic of grammar. It follows the rhythm of interdependence. Every moment of experience is a meeting point, a convergence of conditions, not the action of an isolated self. And when we begin to see this, not just think it, but truly see, it changes how we move through the world. The walls between me and everything else begin to dissolve. We stop standing apart from life, trying to understand it. We realize we are life, arising with all things, flowing with every sound, every sight, every breath. But understanding this with the mind is only the beginning. Concepts, no matter how beautiful, are not enough. A map is not the land. A description of the moon is not the moon. The real question is, how do we move from thinking to seeing? How do we feel this truth with our whole being? That is where we now turn to the path of direct experience. Seeing clearly, the path of mindfulness and the two arrows. We have arrived at a beautiful insight, that the one who sees and the thing that is seen are not two. They arise together, like a wave in the sea. But even a beautiful insight is only a map. It is not the path itself. To truly understand this, we must walk the path. We must see it for ourselves, not just believe it. And the way to see clearly is through direct, mindful experience. This path does not begin in a book or end in a theory. It begins here, in the body, in the breath, in this moment, just as it is. In Buddhism, this is called satipatthana, the way of mindfulness. It means to look gently and honestly at whatever is happening, without running away, without judging, without trying to fix it. To simply witness, before the mind turns it into a story. Let's take something very real. Pain. When pain arises in the body, what do we usually do? We resist it. We tense up. We try to push it away. We say, "I am in pain," and it becomes a battle between me and the sensation. But mindfulness asks a different question. It says, can you look at the pain itself? Not the word pain, not the thought this is bad, but the actual raw feeling. Is it pressure? Is it heat? Is it pulsing or sharp? Where is it? And how does it change? As we do this, something surprising happens. We begin to see what the Buddha called the two arrows. The first arrow is the pain itself, the physical reality. It is real. It cannot always be avoided. But the second arrow is what we add on top of that pain. Our fear, our anger, our story. We say, "Why me? This will never end. I can't take it." That second arrow is the one we shoot into our own heart. Mindfulness allows us to feel the first arrow without firing the second. The pain may still be there, but the suffering, the mental resistance, the clinging, the identity we build around it begins to soften. This is not just philosophy. It is something you can verify for yourself. The same principle applies to emotions. Take anger. When anger arises, the usual response is to become it. "I am angry," we say, and we feed it with thoughts, memories, blame. But mindfulness changes the frame. It says, can you look at anger not as your anger, but as a passing storm? Notice the heat in the chest, the tightness in the jaw, the speed of the breath. These are real, but they are not you. They are conditions that arise and pass. And when we stop feeding the flame, it begins to cool. The fire doesn't need to be put out. It simply runs out of fuel. Now someone might ask, this all sounds nice, but what is really happening in the brain? Neuroscience offers something fascinating here. There is a system in the brain called the default mode network, or DMN. You can think of it as the brain's me maker. It becomes active when we are thinking about ourselves, our past, our future, when we are lost in stories. But during deep meditation, this network becomes quieter, not erased, but softened. And this supports, not contradicts, the Buddhist insight. The Buddha never said we must destroy the self. He simply pointed out that what we call self is not a solid thing. It is like a soap bubble, real in appearance, but empty at the center. The activity may still arise, but we no longer believe there is a fixed me behind it. And when we see this clearly, the whole structure begins to loosen. So what is freedom? It is not about removing pain or emotions or even thoughts. It is about seeing them clearly and no longer confusing them for who we are. It is the shift from fighting life to understanding life, from identification to observation, and from observation to peace. But this peace does not mean passivity. It raises deeper, urgent questions. If there is no solid self, how do we act in the world? How do we face conflict, injustice, even enemies, without falling back into old patterns of fear and division? How do we live from this place of clarity? These are not questions of theory. They are questions of life, and they will guide our final reflection. Living without walls, facing life's hard questions. We've come a long way. We started by questioning the I, only to find it wasn't a thing, but a process. We saw that the observer and the observed are not separate. And through mindfulness, we learned to see that directly. Now comes the real test: life itself. How does this insight carry us through real suffering, real conflict, and real fear? Let's begin with one of the hardest questions. If there's no separate self, what does that mean for self-defense? If I protect myself, am I harming part of myself? Buddhism answers this with the teaching of two truths. On the surface, in the everyday world of names and roles, you must act. If someone threatens your life, you defend yourself. That is natural, necessary, and even compassionate. But at the deeper level, the ultimate truth, there is no enemy. There is only suffering expressing itself through different forms. When we act from this understanding, something changes. We don't act out of hatred. We act like a surgeon, firm, precise, but without anger. The doctor doesn't hate the tumor. The doctor cuts because they care for the body. This is the spirit of great leaders like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. They resisted injustice, but not from rage. They fought to heal, not to destroy. That's what it means to act without a fixed self. The second question cuts even deeper. If there's no separation, why are we still using words like observer and observed? Aren't we reinforcing the illusion? Yes, language divides. It's a tool made of boundaries. But the Buddha taught that his words are like a raft, useful for crossing a river, but not to be carried forever. Once you reach the other shore, you leave the raft behind. The teachings point toward reality, but the truth itself is wordless. And then comes the final question. Am I just using thoughts to chase something that's beyond thought? Yes, that's the trap. You can't think your way to awakening. You have to see. That's what mindfulness offers. Not more thoughts, but direct seeing. A shift from mind to heart, from knowing to being. So what does this look like in real life? When someone yells at you, your partner, your child, your coworker, you begin to see not an enemy, but a human in pain. You don't need to collapse or let them walk over you, but you also don't need to harden your heart. There is space now. Space to see clearly. Space to respond, not react. In society, you see through the us versus them illusion. You start to realize that your well-being is not separate from others. When others suffer, that suffering ripples back into your own life. And when others heal, something in you heals too. And this brings us to the end of the path. Freedom is not about becoming the best version of me. It's not about polishing the ego. It's about seeing that the prison of self was never locked in the first place. Real freedom is living without walls, without the walls of fear, hatred, identity, or pride. It's living with an open heart, a heart that isn't trying to win or prove or escape, a heart that simply is, awake, present, and deeply connected to everything. And when you live that way, even for one breath, you are already free.